Thank you, mushroom.
Right, morning everyone. I'll kick off with a karakia. Takataka te hau ki te uru, takataka te hau ki te tonga, hia makina kina ki uta, hia mataratara ki tai, ihi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei, Māori ora. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south, let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean, let the red-tipped dawn come down in the sharpened air, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day, which matches the weather that we've got today too, so very appropriate. Thank you. Right, as we're in a new facility today, the toilets are in the foyer where you came in, and the men's can be accessed from the side of the hall, which I believe must be out there somewhere. In the event of an evacuation, I think follow Pam, and she'll guide us. Earthquake, drop, cover and hold, and just if we can have our phones on silent, please. And just to note that proceedings are being recorded for the purposes of live video, both live streaming and downloading. So if you're consenting to being filmed, live viewing of the public. Right, so kicking off the meeting, we've got apologies from Councillor Ruddenflaw and Councillor Fraser, who are both at a funeral, unfortunately. Are there any further apologies? Everyone else is here. Someone like to move those apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor Keys. Seconder, Councillor Menzies. All in favour? Carried. Do we have any leave of absence? There being none, I'll move to conflict of interest. Anyone got any conflicts today?
I've got a potential conflict of interest with the licence, the application for the licence. So I might talk to Paul, if that's okay about that.
Is that in today's agenda or?
I don't think so.
Okay, just put today's agenda. That's not
Actually, Paul,
I'm not sure whether it is a conflict of interest per se, or is a potential bias with the Gaudreau Bow Tower project, because I was on the CDA when that was first mooted.
Thank you, Councillor. Any extraordinary urgent items? None. We haven't got the minutes from the last meeting yet, so those will be brought to the next meeting. We're just waiting on something to be finalised for those, so they'll come through to the next council meeting. Which takes us to our public participation, and we have Jeff Scott back again about the wasps. So yeah, around about 5 minutes, Jeff, and yeah, you know the drill, but thanks for coming back. Oh, 10 minutes, yeah, we can give you that.
You'll have 15 minutes to fame, aren't you? Anyway, so we'll just have this will probably take 10 minutes anyway.
Yeah, good stuff.
So just good morning everyone, and thanks for having me back again for an update regarding the wasp. But firstly, I'd like to thank Rob after the Lumsden meeting, that Rob took the time out from his family thing to come to his house to actually have a look at the wasp problem there and talk to me, and then we can see firsthand the problem there and the nest I've treated and stuff like that. And also the SDC approved contractor and the amateur job that she did of treating a nest and whole part. I'm going to leave a copy of this anyway, but I'll miss most of this and I'll just leave a copy because otherwise my minutes will go flat out. So I've been to the Matea Catchment meeting, and their environment Southland actually asked me to kill 2 nests that are in floodlands. So I'm going to pass the stuff around. In the floodlands, when the wasp dig them out, you can just pass it around. Look, this is actually the tailings, the dirt that the wasp dig out, and it actually changed the whole integrity of the floodland. And so when the next day, the fellow actually took an engineer from Environment Southland to show the damage they're actually doing and the potential when the floods actually blow the banks out with the water going through, because the 2 nests there are halfway up the flood bank on the riverside, and on a piece when the river comes around it and then comes with a bit of a bend. So we had a little bit of a talk about that, and they're actually now, they've actually asked me to write, in a submission to them on the wasp nest and a way to mitigate the problem. So one of the reasons I'm here today is because I'd like the Southland District Council to start conversation. I've got some ideas, like it's all very well to go and beg the council on all these things, but I've got some ideas on how to mitigate the wasp problems in the towns, stuff like that. So I just like the opportunity to sit down with some people in that. But what I'm going to do is show them how to at the last meeting, I've been to schools from Karaki Valley out to Buckarel, killing nests. I've done them in Winton, Tara, all over the place. But what's really funny is this year I'm way behind on the wasp nest because the wasp nest is still juvenile. So the one I'm going to pass you around now, have a look at it. It only frightened because unless you open the bag up, there's actually wasps in here. But on a normal wasp nest at this time of year, this is what we expect to see. It's queen's cells, and that's the sign that this nest is going to shut down. They're going to produce all the queens, they're going to hatch out, they're going to get mated, fly around and hibernate for the winter. What you don't really want to know is, I counted, and we've got board over 1,000 queen cells in this nest. Now I stopped. So this nest here was probably about that tall. And so the bulk of the worker wasps had finished, and they're all queen cells that are in the nest. But you can go around and have a quick look at that because it's actually quite interesting. But don't open the bag up and just have to go and pull out the whole of the health and safety stuff. But so this, not very often I get these, but this is actually how a wasp nest starts. So the queen actually, she makes this first original nest, and then she lays in it until she gets enough workers to actually sustain her, and then carries on. So, I don't normally get them out, but this actually come out of the wall of the house. But we probably can't talk much about it. They were selling the house. They went into the bedroom, but when I pulled the giblet to take the nest out, there was no ties on the timber work holding the bricks to the wall and stuff like that. So that's just an example there of the worker comb and the queen comb. That's the thing there, like coming over with comb and that. So in this one, goes up, it's just starting to smell. So the poison we use doesn't matter who it is. Will only kill the wasps that have hatched out. It doesn't kill the larvae. These larvae out here are still males going on planet. They want to be fed. And so you'll see in that plastic bag, you'll actually see live wasps in there because they hatch out. And so they can't build another nest because the queens are gone. But these queens, when they hatch out, can actually all fly away, and other male wasps will mate with them, and then they'll just go and hibernate for the winter. So I talked to Clint and talked about this, the stock tanks and Townsend now got all overgrown. Their biggest problem, they said, they have no money, but he's going to look at trying to get that mowed down because, and I think hopefully they're going to pay me to go there and actually try and locate the wasps because the school's having a huge problem. So, as you probably know, we made a little video, which quite hard case. So I'm just going to read the last part of the letter out, and then. So it's just I just call this one parting shot. When we made the wasp video in the Townsend on the 15th of February and filmed the nest I removed in Townsend on the Racket School Valley, Chris said he would look at getting me approved as an approved contractor. He asked if I had any form of public liability insurance as is necessary. There is nowhere in any form of public liability that covers me for what I do because every nest is unique. So that's something a lot of people never research before paying hundreds of dollars on something that will never get paid out or cover anyone. Yet the approved contractor that you used who admitted that she'd killed one nest for the SPC the year before, and I've done hundreds in the last 5 years for the SPC and not been paid for any of it. Over 50 years, So of the ones I did like last year, over 50 right STC land, it's even more amusing that I wasn't even asked if I had any to make the video, and we're on someone else's property on a public street. The job which SDD paid and the Tautau was amateur at best. Now Rob seen this, and the powder was badly applied and left in a manner, but left that I'd call dangerous. I have modified and specially for applying treatments. I have treated nest in every situation that you can imagine, from walls to roof down these off ladders over 5 metre high with cherry pickers. I've had schools close down buildings and playing fields. Not once has there been an incident because I take the necessary precaution. I've treated wasp nests on walkways and had to divert public away from areas. I've also had to do this multiple times in many towns. Sometimes I've had to notify the police just to make sure that the public stay away from whatever. It's also a humorous note that I have not been offered any compensation at the time and costs involved in making the video. So, one of the things about the approved contractor thing, you actually have a person in Gianna and Manapuri that you pay, and he's actually contacted me after, I think, and you pay him $100 a nest out of a parks appreciation fund. But my biggest thing is I want the Southland District Council to push to Environment South to get the wasp classified as a pest, and then they can actually use that pest levy they've got to actually start doing something about it. So Clinton and Jimmy, who are the two for Invercargill, Tower on the catchment things, are now employed. They get given me job numbers to do the ones just off the stop backs, but they haven't got a lot of money, they've admitted that. But they said they're quite in favour of what I'm suggesting, that we push to have it, the wasp classified as a weakness. Yeah. So with this being the first nest that's actually pulled out queen cells, that means the rest of the nest that I'm pulling out, I still call juvenile, which means that we'd normally be looking at the end of March, middle of April, the most of the wasp nest activity to die off. I can now tell we're going to be going into May. And if you're a beekeeper, you'll know that this time of year the bees get very protective and they get aggressive when you're approaching the hives, and this is the same problem we have with the wasps. So I just recently went across to try and find a wasp nest in Winton on a lady's house, and they were just feeding on chemistry here, no idea, but it was just all the grubs underneath it feeding them. But when I was looking around to find the nest, I went to the school, they had multiple nests they couldn't tie, but they wouldn't employ me to do it. So I said, well, I'm just going to walk away and leave it. So I went to one of the playgrounds there, and the playground equipment would be there, just over there, there was like a little bush area, and that was the wasp nest. I've got a video of quite a good size that was actually attacking the kids, but so I'll give it, and no one's going to pay me for it. There's no job at all. So I don't know how we're ever going to sort that out, but with the price of fuel and stuff there now, and the chemicals, it's actually getting harder and harder to do. But yeah, so whether a solution to that is something.
Worth exploring, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that, Jeff. Do we have any questions from councillors? Councillor,
So is this season particularly bad?
No.
With it? No, this is just
No, it's just one of the wasps, they started late and we didn't get the real cold snap, and that's what we need for the wasp to make the queen cells to go in the process of shutting down. But 10% of all wasp nests don't shut down over the winter, and they come what they call super nests. So the biggest one I've done was in Seawood Bush, and it was 2.75 cubic metres. It was massive. So that was 9 half stages of wasps come out of the line. You drive the big swift at the cavity when we finished with. And that's really funny because Environment Southland got credit in the Southland Times saying they notified me to kill it. They didn't know about it until I told them. And I did that one for nothing to it. So no, it's not worse than so I've done 3 interviews now on Radio New Zealand, and I stressed to them right from the start, this has nothing to do with climate change. It's just their weather patterns. Like we have these long dry spells, and it's just a perfect environment. It's good for bees. It's good for the wasps. The fact that they've started so late. After we did the video, I went to the Roko school, and the smallest nest I pulled out the bank at 7:30 that night was that small. That's unheard of for this time of year, So that means that wasp nest will probably carry on through. So, and that was all along the stop bank that no one's allowed to spray or mow, it's all fenced off. So that's one of my biggest pictures about all the stuff that the environment Southland doing. These unmaintained areas are now just the perfect haven for them.
No, thank you very much, Jeff. And yeah, we'll continue this on. I've certainly learned it.
Even if you had like a group that I like in the council to sit down, because I've got some ideas about how to minimise this the problem, and even like I say, changing the green waste thing at the dumps and stuff.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, we'll keep the conversation going. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming again, and I've learned a hang of a lot from this. So yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
The next one I bring out will be bigger and angry.
We'll have to come to council in B suits. Right, I'll invite the community board chair from Waihopai Totoy Community Board, Pam York, to the table. It's a real pleasure to be out in Wyndham today. So it's yeah, it's great to be here. And yeah, if you like, yeah, feel very far away up there, but just welcome to the other board members that are here as well.
Kia ora everyone, it's me Scott. Introduce me, I'm chair of the Waihopai Totoy Community Board. Previous to that, I've been on the Wyndham Community Board, then the Wyndham Community Board, and now the Waihopai Totoy Community Board. So over a period of time, we've had quite a few different changes, and we've seen a lot of changes. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the Bishop Mayor, councillors, staff, and members of the public, and introduce Paul Stevenson, who is also on our community board, member. The community board welcomes council's initiative to come out to the rural areas and to hold a council meeting. I appreciate the work of administration that is required to move meetings around, realising that's not as easy as it sounds. Unfortunately, council hasn't yet had a chance to travel around the eastern and southern part of the province, but I thought I would give you a quick overview of our community board area. We have some of the province's largest major employers and commercial operators. We boundary all other local bodies, including 4 district councils and the City Council. We support through a rates initiative 5 locally run swimming pools by volunteers. We have one of the busiest stretches of road in the Southland district between Emu and Wyndham over the Tower River. We have boundaries with 3 Runungas, Hokanui, Waihopai and Aotearoa. We have the second highest population behind the Arena Community Board. We have the second highest number of bridges behind the Arena Community Board. We have the most sealed roads and we have the most unsealed roads. We have the most number of towns, 6 in our community board area, and we have Catlins at the back, which is the second most visited place behind North and South. One of my biggest aspirations will be to have everything on our wish list, as in the long-term plan, funded externally and not to be a financial burden on our ratepayers. To do this, we must be more organised and prepared for any external funding that may become available. It is important that we continue to strive for local improvements and have foresight and not stand still. If our predecessors had done this, we wouldn't have what we have today. We need to give opportunities for all spectrums of the community. In front of you is our community board plan, and you'll see the communities we cover inside it and some local statistics and values with the 4 main things from our community engagement. So I can walk through those. Number 1, an attractive, healthy and safe community with access to quality facility, communities and services. Our local library building is a source of contention. Having had to move from its previous site due to earthquake concerns, it was temporarily rehomed some time ago. As in 5 years. I will take you over the time, but you won't all fit in there. There needs to be urgency given to this, especially as during this period of time there has been significant dollars spent on libraries and other areas of the province. So I'm looking forward to consistency across the province for dollars spent here. We are in the early development stage of the complex trail between Emu and Wyndham. This original concept was driven by local children wanting to connect the 2 areas. Children shared schooling, sports and other activities between the 2 towns. At every opportunity, we're undertaking community engagement around it. Our second vision and community and engaged. We recently decided to have a standing crank up day at Emu, which is a significant Southland event. I would recommend every community board undertake this kind of community engagement. It was a great weekend for community board members to meet with the community. We did get a lot of questions around community related, which we expected, of which we recorded these and have gone back to staff to follow up. A lot of the general public made comments that when they went and visited SPC offices, nobody got back in touch with them regarding their issues. A few of the concerns raised were looked at on our recent community board tour. We gave out copies of our community board plan and took names of people who were interested in receiving community board plans in other areas and got staff to send these out. Youth, we've invited the principals of all our schools to come and speak to us in the last triennial. We also had an overview from the chair of the whole community of learning, which encompasses 5 primary schools in the local college. Number 3, a unique natural environment is healthy and protected. We have significant environmental areas of interest with the Waituna Lagoon wetlands, one of the largest remaining wetland complexes in New Zealand, and is important for its biological, diversity and cultural values. The Catlins with Waikato Point, Slope Point, Curio Bay, speed 9 is the petrified grass and the paint name from the New Zealand. Yellow penguins and dolphins, Ranger Falls and Waikato, and the recently completed upgrade of the Southland Ferry. Curio Bay was recognised as an area of significance in the source project. We also had the Wyndham Wildlife Refuge, which the local college has in 1992. This past year, we've started to undertake some planning in the Port Rose area, looking at coastal erosion, freedom camping and climate change, and what should we be providing in the area. We're also looking at the Waikato area in response to the local community asking for some more things for people to do, for example, in fourth vision, our communities have the opportunity to share their history and heritage. Our councillors had the foresight to purchase flag tracks for all our towns years ago. We have now purchased flags for all the towns that celebrate the following occasions, like King Day, Anzac Day, Matter of Peace, and Christmas. Our local music memorial art is 100 years old in 2026 and is due to undergo significant work that will last another 100 years. We have 3 museums in the area: Wyndham Museum, Waikato Museum, and Curioscope Curio Bay. The Wyndham Museum building, which is council owned, is significant cosmic national. So the Wyndham Museum are currently looking at opportunity for relocation. They have been granted use of the building for storage until December 2023. They have an extensive collection and also need to find a storage option for this collection in the short term. Final decisions on site are made. Council are going to demolish this building. I think this is scheduled for 2024. I'm currently distributing a community board plan around the area, and we are currently in the process of correlating concept projects with a long-term plan. Of course, these will all need community consultation. Some of these are as follows. The pool, which is the evacuation area for this area, if it's not flood, we need stable toilets, car park upgrade, wall fix behind us where the asbestos was removed, better meeting rooms, which also include better IT technology. Dog park and indoor, maybe assessment of war memorials across the community board area, solar speed signs for all the towns, I reserve second. We had a community group come forward from Holland who was a great policy. Number 1, an underpass, so the town could be linked together under State Highway 1. Toilets at the local bush and picnic area, signage, feasibility of road alignment, feasibility requirement for community transport, which is already identified in the community plan, which we probably need to do across that whole area, and some public toilets. We will, of course, be adding to that some time as we work our way through our projects in Port Rose and Waikato, and we also have the Curio Bay management plan, which will get underway later this year. These are all significant projects. We are halfway through our board tour. It's to get around the areas of significance in our area. This is taking more than 1 day. We will conclude the remainder of the tour around the Catlins, hopefully sometime in April. Environment South and Spud Link Protection Project in the Wyndham area is now getting underway. Hopefully this will be completed by the winter. One of my headings or areas that need attention. Quite often I sit and shake my head and wonder why I have to micromanage. Sometimes I wonder if people think that I have nothing better to do with my time than to repeatedly point out those issues. Then I sit and say, sorry, but ratepayers are paying for a service. I'm paying for a service. There needs to be more accountability when those services are not being delivered. I can give an example in this community area that for the past 3 years, a particular level of service has been delivered. And that level of service is inconsistent across 8 different towns. It doesn't seem to matter how many RFPs I put in and how many phone calls I make. I even get to the point of saying it's coming up to the spring break cruise. There's something in place that we don't have to repeat it last year. I am assured it is, but it isn't. I have even been known to say to staff, does anybody actually care? It takes to us stopping on a community board tour to point out these anomalies. We get some action, then nothing. It also takes council coming to Wyndham for a meeting for us to get some action on the roads that councils people will drive through, not on the other areas of concern. I will happily take councillors and show them my concerns if they have time. I wasn't going to talk about this in this forum, but I was elected by this area onto this community board by the ratepayers, not by the people in this room. I was elected to be chaired by the community board, not by councillors. So I have to be true to myself and I don't give up and I won't. It is totally unfair on the ratepayers of this area, but the lack of service delivery 3 years is unacceptable. Representatives of community boards also need to be involved with regular discussions relating to matters in the areas, so they can fully understand any concerns that may arise when discussing any initiative moving forward. If this doesn't happen, so much time and information will be lost trying to work together to better enable our communities. One of the other frustrations in council road staff are dealing with us all the time. It's what we car. The old state highway one going past the Endell School. This road has degraded significantly since the roundabout was put in. Just trying to communicate with them is frustrating in itself. We back the road into 100% and not taking back the section of road to date. Even though a lot of areas are district-wide funded, this shouldn't mean that community boards aren't involved in discussions. Regular updates need to be given to community boards on everything that's going on in the area from each department. Ratepayers and residents don't identify with who controls it. The positives. Sometimes simple things that you get thanks for. Kama Reserve under the guidance of Southland's team recently had the car park extended as a lot of people go and walk the track. The Endell school uses the area as a scientific learning area. The appreciation shown by users of this track was huge and very heartwarming for a simple job of extending a car park. Having structure around how to get things done, i.e. the long-term plan, annual plan process has been a game changer, I believe, in the process of being able to plan for improvements. Funding so many community groups with community facilities funds each year, bringing them all along to meet us, hearing their stories and passion for what they do, and hopefully making these volunteers' lives a little bit easier. Helping financially support all advice and involvement by volunteers in the area so people have the opportunity to use a local facility. Being successful on the Better Up funding round will enable 3 local community groups to undertake some local projects. The Wyndham Lions want to enhance the view of the Spear and Wyndham. Margarita Hall Committee are looking at improving access to the hall and putting in disabled toilets. Access to the hall with disabled or older people became an issue when the hall was used for an evacuation centre for Wyndham residents in the 2020 floods. The South Counties Promotion Group are looking to complete the final stage of the skate park on top of that. The community board were also successful in obtaining funds to do some additional footpath maintenance, which of course is ongoing. Recently, I also had the opportunity to become involved on the steering committee for Hokanui localities, which is the establishment of localities as a fundamental part of the reform of New Zealand's health system. My interest in this came about as so many of the rural districts use either the maternity medical centre, core medical centre, core health, core hospital, or other health services they have for. This plan is and was based around the Force District Council boundary and it is led by the Hokanui Renanga. The Hokanui locality will plan and make recommendations for the delivery of healthcare services within the wider Gore district, servicing the needs of our residents and those who travel from nearby areas to receive treatment here. A local partnership has been formed with iwi, health, social care and community organisations. The locality partnership will work with Ngātahu, Iwi Mary Partnership Board, Chief Whakarā Health Network and Te Whakarā Mary Health Policy to plan the services that will be delivered by providing networks in our locality. There's a lot to look forward to. We have a lot of things to be worked through, but if we are successful, they will be assets for future and current generations to come. Council programs are slow, but there's one reason why you need to future projects. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, thank you for your passion for your community too. It's you've been doing it for a long, long time and you're still very passionate in that show today. And thank you for the honesty in that presentation as well. It's and just want to acknowledge not only the work that you and your board do, but the things like that crank up day and that tent that you put there was yeah, I saw it firsthand and it was definitely valuable. And it was you were showcasing council as well. So yeah, thank you for that. Are there any questions from councillors? Yep, Councillor Byers.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam. Just you mentioned with some passion discrepancy in the levels of service. What particular area are you referring to?
Just general maintenance around the town, spraying in weeds and control and things like that. So for the last 3 years, we seem to get forgotten about it, and then there's also a different level of service being delivered across the 5 or 6 different towns. And yeah, it's not getting any better.
Do you think that could be a symptom of these big contracts rather than having local people managing your towns?
No. No, I don't. No. It's just been inside. That's double being. It's got more than one thing.
Councillor Chamberlain.
It was probably some of what Councillor Byers asked, but I would just, can you elaborate on what you're saying about what you're feeling? If you want to be honest.
I think with all these contracts, you award contracts to people and it's a big dollar value, and then on the other hand, you've also got to have follow-up that contracts are being done to what's required. So I think it's a double wing thing. I appreciate the contract that may have had different staff changes and things, but it's still, I suppose what the frustrating thing is, you can identify things but still nothing happens. So to me, it's lack of accountability.
We make some of these contracts more localised. Is that, we had talked about it, I think, but is there an opportunity to do that to this accountability stays within the community?
There will be an opportunity as they come up for renewals and the likes to have a look at that and look at the procurement. But
I don't know if even if they were local in that, you still need to have accountability from even perhaps council that people are doing their jobs and things like that. I wouldn't guarantee 100% that you'd still get runs off. I think there's a lot of processes that need to be sorted.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm just wondering on what's your view as far as the wider community in terms of the RFS process? Is this kind of left to the board to follow up with council regarding that level of service, or is the wider community aware of the RFS and has that process got room for improvement?
Well, I suppose at the end of the day, we don't actually know what a community putting in on RFSs. I mean, we get a graph that says RFSs and so many of them are done, but I mean, it doesn't break it down to who, what, where. Is it all on one thing? And particularly in our area, to make sure that graph's the provincial one. So we can't pick from an RFS. That's if there's an issue from our area, we're the staff keen on that. We don't get that information.
So that's an area for improvement, you'd think?
Yeah.
Councillor Duffy.
Pam, do you think there's a possibility that the move away from area engineers sort of closely looking after township, if you like, has contributed to this?
Yes, because there's still lots of anomalies, especially like around Wyndham where there's ditches and flood ditches used to get cleaned, bypass ditches and that have just dropped off the radar. So there was a lot of information that probably don't sit under anybody's particular work stream that have dropped off. So I would, yes, thought that an engineering driving around, the area engineer would have noticed those things and perhaps put something in place. Now it's like you're relying on us to complain.
Anyone else got any questions?
Just congratulations on the report. We've got a hell of a lot going on in your area. There's a lot of goodness and energy, and so well known to you for stepping up as you're obviously very passionate about the area. You mentioned earlier about external funding with regards to not putting too much pressure on that. You also mentioned better funding as well. less things like reports. Because you've got so much going on in this area and there's a lot on the agenda, do you run the risk of spreading yourself too thin based on the perceived level of external funding that could be made available and not made available?
If everything happened, yes, but as we know, it doesn't. So, like our walkway plan, you know, we started initially, but I believe it will still be. I'd be surprised if we're up to a point of going to a contract that, you know, we get community buy-in within a year. I think the way things take to get everything, and especially do your homework right. I mean, we don't around the bucket. So I believe we need to, you know, if we do it right, it takes time. So I don't think so. I think there'll be multiple things going on, but they'll be moving at different speeds. And that will take time. And we all know how long it takes to get people to discuss things, do things, move on. So no, I don't think so. And I think if we don't, it's a bit like if they had never sealed, like the amount of time it took to get this thing sealed. I mean, you wouldn't, best thing ever done. But it takes time to get the result. So it's probably long-term thing, 10 years, some of those things could be there. But we all know that nothing gets done.
Sure. You've got a good cohort of legionnaires supporting you. You've got the support that you need within your.
Yeah, I think getting there. Yeah, there's definitely a group of people that, yes, definitely drive the same thing. It's just different levels of the organisation, probably, I suppose. But I also learned that you've got to be prepared and be working towards those things very quickly. That is by chance, so it's funding. And we've seen it happen in other areas of the province that have been organised and, you know, been able to capitalise on it.
Got Councillor Bakeroy and then Councillor Chamberlain.
You mentioned the cycleway walkway. Do you have any idea what's the total amount of funding you're looking for that one?
To be fair, no, but when they did round the cycle mountain range, we did sort of a bit of a strategic plan with the finance then, and our biggest problem was bridge. So at that stage, potential figure thrown around is 3 or 4 million. Whether that sits in the same scope or what.
Is there buy-in from the community for 3 or 4 million for 5Ks? Is there massive buy-in from the community for that sort of a figure?
Definitely, I would say so. We've been definitely talking to different areas of the community for 10 years probably, and you know, you get big buy-in from schools. I mean, you've got 650 kids over a province, in a community board area, and 500 of them are in this area.
Using this area. And do we have a problem? Because you mentioned safer connections. Have we had a problem with accidents and all in
There's
this
a lot of
area?
people now that bike, walk to, a lot of people work at Frontier.
Right.
That sort of thing. It's a very heavy, it's the road itself, there's a lot of heavy industry on it, a lot of trucks, a lot of tractors, a lot of logs comes out, especially out of the South Otago coast. There's a lot of people that try and use that road now. And a lot of people that, you know, get a bit worried about it. So
is there a possibility of buy-in from those sort of organizations to reduce the pressure on the community for this project?
oh, we'll be looking at all sorts of options. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Chamberlain.
It's, we want it to be multi-use. So, you know, people with friends, disabled people with scooters, like we have passionate people that would try and get from Winton down to the rugby game on a scooter. You know, that sort of interactive, and you know, one of the attraction, different things.
I guess that's the question I have, you know, is, you know, after driving around the communities and everybody's got their wish list and stuff like that, but I remember quite clearly in the election when we were in front of one of the biggest issues is rate increases. So where's the trade-off in it? You know, we're predicting a 7.8% rate increase. You know, people want a lot of these projects, and what do people want? Would they rather pay less rates, or where's the balance, I suppose, is the question.
And I think that's the difference between council and community boards. They're actually community board part of the rate. It's quite small. And I actually believe we look after our component of the rate quite well. The top major 100% of the rates is us. And that's why you want to have a really good scenario and try and get a lot of funding.
Councillor Greene.
Thanks for your presentation, Pam. That was really informative. Question on your site on that multi-purpose trail that you're looking at. Is that intended to be a community project or potentially outsourced trust?
No.
The reason I ask is that there's potentially, if it's under a different entity, you have opportunity for far greater funding, other external funding for the community trust, lotteries, etc. And I'm also mindful. A good example is in the Building Trails Trust. Wakatahi came to the party and provided that trail with a $300,000 bridge for crossing the Upakura. So there may be other ways to look at that, and particularly when you're sort of citing safety and keeping people off the roads, which would appear to be a similar issue here compared to. So just a thought.
And that kind of ties in with what you originally said with one of your visions was to get as much external funding coming in as possible, and that's a potential route to sort of do that. So,
But to do that, you've still got to do all the groundwork.
correct.
On this to get it to it. So,
Yeah.
and as a catch-22, we've got to spend money to do that. So,
But there is huge importance in that planning and getting that part right, and it's, I know you're doing that very well. So, yeah. Oh well. Oh,
Sorry, just another question. Sorry, just noted your intention around strengthening relationships with iwi, and you talked about the localism project and the links with Papanui there as well. So when you talk about strengthening the relationships, it's kind of building on top of the relationship already have established, or is that, are you thinking it's a place you need to start, for example, with Aurora?
I just get totally confused on it, to be fair. Like we have that relationship with Papanui, and we had it prior to like that Papanui localities, but say for example, the multi-use trail, starts like, we have to discuss with them before we go any further. And then I'm going, well, I'd be interested in coming along because if we have certain concerns and things, we need to be able to understand them and get it to our project, but I don't know if staff have a complete overview of the project, especially if staff change. So it's like, iwi, which I assume is Tammy, and we have this relationship with Bruno, and there's all the roots blur. So it's like we're in a holding pattern, but I don't want to be holding Bruno.
Okay.
So it's like, how does it work?
So some clarity around the pathway on how to do that for you and get that local level.
Why can't we, like to me, stuff like this, those connections. It's one way to say, well, we can't go, but we should be able to go, If there's going to be a reason for it, I don't want to do a board district council bridge. Like if there's going to be something that they're not happy with, concerned about, then you need to be able to understand what those concerns are and have that localism to know whether or not that could be an easy option fix. So it's just really vague, I suppose, from where we sit. That whole
For other community boards, perhaps.
yeah. And like you say, yes, we have that link with no, but no, we haven't had, we do have a link with our certain groups, south, but we probably haven't had that link with Waihakai, but then no one said, go and get the link, and we would go and get the link, sort of thing. So to me, it's really great.
Cool. Oh, thank you very much for that, Pam. Much appreciated. Oh, sorry, do we have a?
I was just going to add to what Pam said about the multi-use track. That's actually been a top priority at community concept type meetings for the last 10 years. So it's
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, really appreciate you coming along and sharing that with us. And I'll move from the chair that we acknowledge Pam's attendance and at the meeting, and we accept the report. So there's a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Mendes. All in favour? Hopefully there's no one against. Thank you very much, Pam. Right, now on to 7.2, which is page 1 of your agenda with the recommendations on page 10. So it's the Gorge Road Bell Tower project. And I believe we have Karen.
Kia ora, tino koutou katoa, and councillors. You have in front of you the Gorge Road Bell Tower project, budgeted expenditure request. I'd just like to point out in paragraph 8, there's a slight error on the last line where it's got Winton Town Wood Reserve, and that should actually read Wood Reserve. I'll take this report as read, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I was quite keen on it coming out.
I thought that was part of Pam's vision, the external funding coming in.
I did get a resolution.
Are there any questions for Karen on this report? Seems pretty straightforward. A historic project just getting moved forward. So we'll go to the recommendations. Do we have someone willing to move A through to D? Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Spraggan? All in favour? Anyone against? Gary, nice and easy. Okay, so 7.3, unbudgeted request for aerial photography on page 19 of your agenda. Recommendations on page 20. I believe Adrian Jane. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you. I could just take the opportunity, councillors, to apologise for joking as I'm sitting. Adrian's on hand. You'll see in a minute. He's the team leader of GIS. He is on hand to answer any questions. I think a particular welcome to him. He's been with us for quite some time. The key point in this report, I think, is point 16. There is actually money in next year's budget for this, but we're suggesting it comes forward to this year. And the reasons I say to there, we've got all this stuff in this area sooner than we generally expected to, and taken advantage of the weather. So I don't know if Adrian wants to add anything to that. I know he's prepared for questions.
Has anyone got any questions? Yes, it's a good example of shared services between the councils achieving a collective combined result, and we may as well make the most of the good weather. Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just wondering why we do it every 5 years.
Is that a question? Did you hear the question, Adrian?
Good morning, Worship and councillors. I did hear the question. The reason we capture every 3 to 4 years typically is to capture when there's been development in a town or across the region. It's a fairly uniform movement of development, so we're trying to capture that, and it's very useful for managing events, facilities, assets, and emergency management. So it's as a broad range of use across council, and it's also very useful as a bird's eye view, even for farmers when they load up their imagery into their own farm management systems, which is supplied by Land Information New Zealand, the main contributor to the funding of this project. So we're contributing about 30% of the project. Unfortunately, it's a bit ahead of schedule, but it's been brilliant weather, and we thought we would try and take the most of it.
Oh, thanks, Adrian. And is that information free to us to access, free to ratepayers?
Yes, it's basically Land Information New Zealand receive the imagery and pump it into their nationwide mosaic. That then gets filtered through to different firms, through like Fonterra, all these different contributors and stakeholders. So we all get to see the same imagery across the board.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Any further questions, Councillor Menzies?
No, I was going to add, I'm happy to move, and it's nice to be ahead of schedule.
It is. Yeah, we'll celebrate that. Councillor Poperoy.
If I may ask, even though it's not on this time's agenda, in the material funding, we've got an additional 1 million for spatial planning, GIS mapping. Since you are in the team, could you tell us more what that money is going to be used for?
Sure thing. It's a range of planning for future events and development. So things like climate change, getting a handle on what we have to combat it and adjust. And it's being worked through with a planning team and ourselves. So we're collating different data, working with potentially consultants who are experienced in the area and who've done previous spatial plans to help us guide through the process.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is how that one is different from what we have been doing routinely every 3 to 4 years.
So aerial imagery is just a bird's eye view of basically an aerial photo directly down of what we have in the district. The spatial plan collates aerial photography, LiDAR, utility data, assets, population information, all these different data sets, and brings them together into understanding what we want to do as a region and district. So we're going to be working with Environment Southland, ICC, GORE, and different stakeholders all together really to have some input.
Just one last follow-up question, please. How would you be able to confirm to me what amount of that work, of that $1 million, will be spent in-house, and how much of that is going to be managed by external consultants?
For your worship, I'm not too sure. I would have to defer that question to later. I can find that out for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Adrian.
Cool. So that Councillor Menzies moving it. Are you sticking it, Councillor?
No, I'd just like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Through your worship. Morning. Are there any alternatives to using aircraft? Can you use satellite imagery to be able to, I guess, mitigate against potentially duplicating things? Is that a possibility?
For your worship, we had a firm that provided a proposal, but it was pretty much double the cost. And they didn't actually meet our brief because their quality of imagery was too coarse for urban areas. Aerial photography, there's some really experienced providers, and LandPro, they are very, very thorough. Their methodology really stood out. The satellite imagery is getting better though. So it's really attractive for revisitation. Don't have to expend aviation fuel and all the like. As sensors improve and we get more proposals, I suspect it'll become more competitive in future. But unfortunately, this particular RFP, it was not comparable.
I guess that's the nature of the technological space that's in. It's going to improve as years go on, and we'll get better data and hopefully cheaper data too.
I agree. It's an exciting space. Sorry for the pun.
Councillor Wilson.
I spend a little bit of time zooming around, looking bird's eye view. I just like looking at maps and something, but I noticed that with a lot of aerial photography over time, particularly around rivers and hydro parcels, the aerial imagery shows quite a change from the original survey of hydro parcels. And just wondering whether that's something that's being looked at. I guess that would be whether LINS is taking charge on that, and at what point does, I guess, the survey get re-acknowledged that the aerial overlay doesn't match in a lot of areas. A community board just the other night was talking about a particular area near a river where there's no access to a popular recreational spot, but it kind of lands in no man's land because the imagery of where they're talking about actually is kind of not council jurisdiction. Or is there any discussion around readdressing the border lines of survey to match what every 3 years the aerial imagery is actually starting to show doesn't align, particularly around rivers? I don't know who that question is directly. Does anyone?
Is there anyone wanting to answer that question or able? Are you able to answer that question?
I've had a discussion with someone that works in land information, and they were saying that it is a real issue, that the technology that was when it was first set up doesn't match with what we have available today, and so there is a lot of parcels of that. And they had proposed a way of dealing with it, but it didn't meet with standards. So it's probably something that, or it didn't meet with approval for the budget, which from the point of view that I was told, it seemed a little bit odd that it wasn't considered. It was sort of back down to everybody doing their own thing, whereas overall view for New Zealand would have been a much better outcome. So probably something we need to follow up on, because that's showing through now.
And also, I guess, ensure that the imagery and the data is available, so we're not double handling, and whether a ratepayer or a taxpayer, we don't want to pay for something twice. So I think it's yeah, conversations need to be. Someone in a position to move, second that report, sorry. Councillor Byers, thank you. All in favour? Anyone against? Gary. Thank you for that, Adrian. Thank you, Jane. All right, we're up to 7.4, the financial report, which is on page 23 of your agenda. And I believe we have Anne speaking to this one.
I'm sorry for the interruption, but I just think it's worth noting that today's International Women's Day, which was apparently instigated in 1909, and it's about equality and so on. I just wonder if we should note that.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. I wasn't aware of that, so thank you.
Chair is Councillor Duffy suggesting you'd like to wear heels.
All in favour?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, councillors. I'm here today to present the financial report to the end of December 2022. Our staff member Joni now had thought that the internet might have been the problem, but instead it was a little baby. When her latest baby is just 4 and 6. So please take a bit of time with me today when I don't actually know all the answers to the questions that you may have. I don't think there's a lot of change from what we've had in the last report. The income is still slightly down, mainly due just to the timing of the Alpha Island project, which is still going through the assembly process. And in terms of our expenditure, we've got probably one good news story in there that's continuing on from last financial report, which is around the price of diesel and electricity cost for CASA. So that's been great. We've got some more timing issues going in there in regards to the parks and reserves and things that are going to occur. And of course, we've still got some biodiversity questions around what actually our role in that area is. So we've got some lower costs potentially in there, as well as just this interest cost at this stage. In regards to our capital expenditure, it is lower at this stage than what we had also planned. We are planning, of course, to bring to you on next council meeting, in fact, it will be the finance insurance meeting coming up on the 22nd, a forecasting report. But that will be for some of the councillors the first time we'll have seen us actually reforecast where we think the financial year position will be. So that will include some of the information today. We are also just looking at a report that's coming up. I think that's in April, isn't it? Just around the capital program and the delivery of that and where we're at and what we're planning. Those are the conversations that we've had with you previously as well. In regards to our balance sheet, we're looking very stable again. We had indicated previously as part of our annual planning process that we'd be required to take at least another 20 million this year in loans to fund our capital works. At this stage, we're still looking at 10 million of it moving into next year, which we included as part of the annual plan. So we haven't actually taken any money to date, but my staff are estimating that we will need to go out and do that in April, effectively draw down that $10 million from the LGFA. So we'll be looking at some rates and at that stage. Otherwise, I'll if there's any questions.
Thanks to that, Anne. Councillor Menzies.
Thank you. Just a comment in relation to, obviously, this is a report at the end of December and we're in March. So the not too long ago to go for the rest of the financial year. So with this report, do we also get an indication that for the last few months things are staying on a similar track, or we need to wait till the next report for the end of March, which may be with us in June.
So like I said, we'll be doing a forecasted position in our next council report, and we'll also be giving you the next council one. So I'm just trying to think, because it's always about the timing. The issue that we always have is we're going to be at least generally probably 2 months behind, just because of the timing of the agendas and when we're cutting off. So our next council meeting is when, the 5th of April. And my expectation would be then that you'll only be getting your February, what are you doing February? Because February will be cutting off in March. So we may see if we can get a March one up there, but it'll most likely just be February again, just because of cutoffs. But we definitely look at it on a regular basis. So if there was anything else that would be coming up, we would be telling you, and it's something else that we'd seen on here.
Yeah, no, that's a useful reassurance.
But it's a forecasting realistically. But the forecasting report is what's in here. There's some timing issues and there's some capital works that we're needing to move forward. I mean, in terms of the big dollars, we're in the roading program, that's all on track. That always is. It's a very regular, repetitive program that just gets delivered. Yeah, the other stuff in water and wastewater and things like that tends to possibly, and community facilities would get delayed due to either resource problems, contractors, because you're dealing with a lot more contractors than you are with the roading program, and it's also weather events. But that's not probably going to be a problem here, but we're better expand.
And I guess some of that stuff would come up as unbudgeted expenditure for those red herons that come up outside of this process. So anything that's come up in the last few weeks would be highlighted through that on top of this, wouldn't it? Are there any further questions, Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, sure. It's probably more for going forward into the LTP cycle, but it'd be valuable, I feel, to get a really good breakdown on some of the assets, particularly like property, plant and equipment, and just as a really good overview in terms of what those assets are, and if we're coming into an LTP cycle, we're having a look at levels of service and also just management of assets for us to have a really good idea of what potentially those properties are and how they're being utilised. And I'm just, yeah, it'd be good to have a broader view on some of those lines within the assets. So is there an opportunity for that to come before we enter into that?
Will that almost form part of the long-term plan process? Probably not to that lower level, but looking at the likes of the land, like, are you referring to sort of land and buildings, or like when you say assets?
Would be the one,
yeah.
To get a better overview, considering there's the open spaces, there's walls, there's a lot to look at, and before communities are asked to look at levels of service, whether there's some type of property and asset management that could be managed differently. Or
Mr. Chair, you may remember some time ago, and some of new councillors would remember, but there is a review that is going to be taking place for more of their property, more of their property, just to understand its purpose and where it's at, and the council to consider its long term.
So they will.
That's actually, that is on the agenda.
Cool, thank you.
Did you want to say something?
Thank you. Your wish will be granted. You are going to get vast amounts of information about the assets of service, because the long-term plan is a major undertaking and it's a council responsibility. So you may regret some of that question later.
Did you want to speak to that as well, Nick?
I think the new council benefit we share ourselves and assets and land associated to quite a lot of different in varying countries, whether that's land associated with waterways, drainage locations, all sorts of things. So the different areas that we wanted to see a little bit more information on would be really, otherwise we'd be digging into quite a way of information that may not even be relevant for pieces of land that's connected to one property that we understand a lot of cost.
But that's not something that we look to change. But if there's specific assets that we want to join, don't get the answer today, but we can bet on the areas.
Yes, Councillor Menzies.
Just while you're on your feet, you may be able to identify for us in the property review that has just been referred to. What does that entail and when will it be due?
Through your worship, I'll probably come back to you. It has been someone that's been wasn't. And currently the reference through updating asset data that all used to be going on various individual spreadsheets. That's all now going on a centralized database, which brings overview of I'm not trying to get students, but we have literally thousands of property that instances that you have, and strange enough, some that exists out there that has been lost in translation over many years that we actually have. So it is a bit this work to actually but I'm going to come back and talk to our problem.
That may address some of Councillor question here.
If I can give an example, just from a community board meeting, quite a large strip of property in the Adlaser board that is more confusion at this point of whether it's council owned or not, whether the people currently paying rates on it have ownership of it. It was understood to be council, but and not clarity on actually who the ownership of that land is, and if there's areas like that around the region that could potentially be better managed, or if not liquidated to bring in some of these revenue issues. I think it's definitely worth a look, especially if the information is more available than on spreadsheets now.
Thank you. I'll go Councillor Byers and then Councillor Chamberlain and Buckroyd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on page 34, this environmental services, what the environmental health, refresh my memory what that includes. Environmental health.
So that'll be
Looking under our alcohol licensing and that, what else is there? The cruise premises.
Okay.
that answered your question.
Yep.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Just a question on just why there's such delay. We're starting of March and we're only getting financials to the end of December. I spoke to an Alliance director the other day, and if they were having a meeting today, they would get full financial actuals right at the end of January. That might have a fair idea what's happening in February. So I was just concerned about the delay. We seem to be 2 months behind.
To be honest, I need to go just back and check, because I must admit when I've seen the December one there, I thought, oh, it's actually that interesting. I thought I might have seen January here, but I will need to just go back and check what's happened. It could well be that my staff have just gone actually to get a report to each meeting, and given that there's another one in April, actually you just need to follow the process along, otherwise you'll miss a report. But I'll just check with that and find out, and then I think I'll send you something out and just let you know how this thing is working.
Yeah, I think the Councillor Chamberlain's point, and also Councillor Menzies before, it would be good if we could have them as up to date as practicably possible.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Councillor Buckroyd.
Your worship, I am just trying to understand on page 30, environmental services, the underspend of 605K, 12%. Would you spell it out for me? You say resource management vacancies make up 75% of the underspend. So are we saying these are lesser staffing costs, or is it actually the amount of money budgeted for, the mappings and all?
Yeah, so no, what we've allowed for is when we completed the 2021 to 24 long-term plan, we made allowance to increase our resourcing over a 3-year period for the biodiversity, because initially we we're going to put it all in 1 year, and then from memory, and Frank agreed because she was part of it at the time, we decided to actually just tier it in. And so our budgets are sitting there, but that policy or that still is being worked.
And you are saying these are staff costs underspent. This is not the actual work, because I seem to remember, and I could be wrong here, there was about 9 million for mappings.
That was.
So we are not saying it is that amount. We are saying this is staffing costs underspent, not the actual work done underspent.
It's a staffing component. The staff haven't been recruited into those roles because of biodiversity. So it's the biodiversity piece of legislation, not just waiting on that piece. So was it going to come in? We're obviously predicting we're trying to predict.
I get it. So you're saying this is staffing underspent. So how about that 9 million? We've never actually put it in the budget that was put in the long-term plans.
So remember how you estimated it?
It was estimated 3,000 sites at $3,000 each. Where does that go then?
So this is, so illegal, all we got like a thread.
Right, okay.
Only a portion. And over the period of time, it was actually each year there was a slight increase in the amount that they would be doing.
So we are catering for that actual work if and when it comes to 4. There won't be a sudden amount then added, unbudgeted. That's where my worry lies.
The reality at the time, there was we recognised that trying to even get enough ecologists to do the work would have been an impossibility. So there was always a recognition that bringing that, having that piece of legislation in place, there would be a gap between being able to resource up and be able to meet the commitment of that piece of legislation. So with that piece of legislation not being put in place, we haven't.
So if we are suddenly supposed to, we are told, right, get onto it, that will increase the rates hike we predicted even more. That's what you're telling me?
Well, depending on potentially what we assess the needs will be, then we'll have to.
Because I am still going by that 9 million figure I saw 2 years ago.
And it was purely an estimate based on the initial draft bill.
Correct.
So right now, as the rates rise, we predicted do not allow for any work to be done. That will be additional
wages. They allow for people to be employed,
but not the actual
to
work.
this level. Yeah. And if there was to be more than that, then you would have an unbudgeted expenditure report in front of you.
Right. That's
the bill is asking for this to be done. We've assessed it and we require this amount of resource from this budget. So here's the amount.
So potentially, if and when that comes to 4, the rates would go higher than what we budgeted. Well, we don't have that in the budget.
No, depending on where the responsibilities lie, I don't know.
I can give you a response. See, since I looked at that, we covered last 18 months. But at the time, it was approximately 25% of the amount that was being looked at to be able to work for a process, and there was opportunity to push that out longer. So I'm going to suggest that of the $1 million the water that came through was approximately, and that's very much was sort of coming down.
Thank you. I've got an answer. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Yeah, we acknowledged as a council at the time that it was going to be physically impossible to actually do the work. Cool. Any further questions? Cool. Someone in a position to move that we receive the financial report? Councillor Menzies, do we have a seconder? Councillor Duffy, all in favour? Anyone against? Gary. Thanks, Anne. Hey, and we are now up to the Land Drainage Act on page 43 of your agenda. And welcome back, Jane.
Thank you. Councillors, you may recall it was the last meeting, the chief executive was talking about the submission to the water service people. He raised the issue that we have just got an email asking us for council's position on this act, and could we please provide it in 3 days? So we duly pushed back to get more time to consider it properly, and took the opportunity to ask DIA in their view why should it be repealed. So you've got their view on 5 bullet points in section 7 as to why it should be repealed. It largely supports
the advice we've got from a external lawyer that is reproduced in the minutes. Our legal advice does talk about farm drains, but in our view, that's not a compelling enough reason to want to keep it. There will be councillors more about this, and I myself will be on. But when we put it all together, the reasons are compelling for it. So I would feel opportunity to include it in the legislation to be.
Cool, thanks, Joe. I've just got a question around the potential risks around the stormwater. This bill was obviously put in for a reason back in 1935, and repealing it and not knowing exactly what's going to happen to stormwater down the track, could it actually have a risk in us not being able to manage water coming off the road? Because there's parts in there to say that we go into private properties to actually do stuff, and if we lose the ability to do that, we could have some flow-on effects. Do you see that as a potential?
There's risks everywhere, I think, on water at the moment. It would be fair to say we are carrying on until we're told differently that the legislation or the government policy will change. So if it goes ahead, the risk of the issue transfers to the entity. There's a lot of, what's the word, uncertainty around that. But I think, as we said in our submission, overall, this is a good thing to do. It's how it's been done. So that will fall back into how we work with the new entity to make sure nothing falls between the gaps. If it doesn't go ahead, well, acts will need to be repealed. And things will have to be undone on that.
Because I just worry about the damage to our potential infrastructure, like our roading, which can get damaged from what this is trying to sort of address. And if that gets taken away, even if it's gone with another party managing it, we're exposing ourselves potentially there. But, yeah, Councillor Green.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, that was sort of in line with the question that I had. I'm just wondering if this is a bit premature in terms of timing. You know, what will the timing be around this, and actually, is there any way of getting the timing more appropriate and closer to the DIA potentially looking at the changing of ownership of the entities, as opposed to rushing into it and then having to undo it later, but leaving us with the risk in the meantime.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you. I was wondering whether recommendation D might be amended to make it conditional, make the council support conditional on the full transfer of all three waters, so that you've still potentially, if it didn't go ahead or it went ahead in some different form, you've still retained that. I mean, they can still repeal it anyway. And it would be nice to express that view that there's a bit of concern around what might happen in the gap, so to speak, between one course of action and another.
Councillor Duffy?
Yes, well, I've got some concerns about this from a farming point of view, and unrelated to three waters. So this act has been around since 1935. It was obviously put in place for a reason. I can recall one hearing that we had under this act, which was a situation of neighbour disagreement in the Manapuri area, I'm sure. But I see that it's said both in the legal opinion and in point 14 that it's likely to be regulated by ES. Well, we don't know that it's going to be regulated by ES. And I do think farmers or landowners need some protection against neighbours who won't give them outfall. And I mean, I've seen groundwater and water regulated by ESL, and the results are that great. So I would be rather concerned to see this done away with without some other sureties in place.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should be connecting it to Three Waters because it's away from, a lot of it's away from that realm.
Yeah. Councillor Byers?
And does this, the farm drainage, are there implications there for the roading network that with that asset will reliable, with the roading network at risk?
Yeah, well, that's my concern as well, yeah.
In both ways, both the council can be the one who's holding up the drainage through the depth of a culvert perhaps, but also the council's water getting away from the council asset.
So there's a general feeling around the room, if I'm right, on discomfort around this. Councillor Keith, did you? Councillor Menzies?
Thank you. Yes, I have a feeling of discomfort as well, and I think it was very useful to go back to DIA and get their view. I think the bullet points there, the counties of Southland, Wallace have been replaced. Well, that's clear, no debate there, and we've gone to decimal currency. That's very clear as well. But I note in the other bullet points, it talks about Part 26 Local Government Act, blah blah blah, may now govern. And if you go to the fourth bullet point, it says Part 10 of the Water Services Legislation Bill may replace, and the possibility that there are provisions within the resource management that the possibility that there are now provisions. So there's no certainty in what the I guess the issues that they've identified coming back to us as the reasons why it should be repealed, and then we've got to read that in conjunction with the legal advice, with the legal opinion that says on the point 6 they've identified an issue there around the farm drains, and just talks about the responsibility of ES in there, and you consider whether we want to retain the power, although they've said it's unlikely. It was just enough there for me to be weary going ahead with this and adding to the comments that have already been made. So in what ways are we disadvantaged by not agreeing to it?
Very good question.
I wonder if there's the option that the chief executive suggested was to add another recommendation, or we leave it lying on the table and then answering, thinking a bit more about some of these questions, but I'm not sure. I prefer to legal. I suspect we need to keep the conversation going for a bit longer, but
The part of it as well, to Councillor Duffy's point, is actually knowing cases of when this has actually been used and tested in the past to kind of see what it has. I mean, we know one case here, but how many other times has it actually been used, and for things we potentially don't know about as well?
Yeah, or how many times does it actually lead to action without being used?
Yeah,
you know, just the fact that it's there.
or we could just no, there's too much uncertainty to give a definitive answer at this point.
If I may, I'd suggest actually we do leave that on the table. I'm prefer not to have a council resolution at a subsequent meeting. You then directly countered it. Potentially, I think we need to just find out a bit more. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know that we're going to be in a position to get much reassurance from DIA though. So we'll have to go away and have a think about what it is, what the implications are a bit more. And certainly hearing the views of the room. So I think carrying it over will probably be the most prudent. I'm happy to relay to DIA that this isn't a straightforward matter for this council. and they might like to think about that.
Yeah, councillor Memphis.
Just in terms of clarification, thank you, Worship, don't require our agreement to go ahead and repeal it anyway, so they can
I think that is
proceed with that regardless of what our opinion is. So we have the advantage of time and thoroughness, perhaps.
And I think it's just another case of this. It came to the chief executive on the 11.5 hour of submission, and it's the stuff that's coming through so fast, and we need to actually have time to be prudent and do our job and look at things properly. So yeah, I think it's councillor Geist.
Thank you, Richard. I'm just wondering how other councils or TIs, territorial authorities, actually deal with this matter. Do they all have the Land Drainage Act from 1935?
Very good question.
Really, your worship, one of these three waters meetings. Southland region, I think we're the only one to have an connect such as this to do. There must be more around than country.
That's awesome.
I'm just thinking on that, I'm concerned that this Southland's provision of this act has helped form the stormwater infrastructure that we have in its current state. So just thinking of Lumsden, our stormwater drains are natural creeks that this act would have allowed further upstream the enhancement of for the sake of drainage. That water travels downstream into town, it then becomes natural creeks again, then it becomes infrastructure, stormwater through culverts, through drains, back to open creeks. So we've got this stormwater infrastructure that's already moulded essentially or potentially by this legislation. And my concern with I guess the Three Waters in itself is trying to determine what stormwater is when it starts, when it becomes the responsibility of the entity, or when it's just a free-flowing stream from precipitation up in the hills. And this act may, be a problem upstream before it gets down to then what the entity is considering stormwater. So it needs a holistic look at the whole thing. So I think on that basis, it would be wise to kind of approach carefully and have a bit more time, get more clarity on what is stormwater. For a start, it's the biggest confusion for me in Three Waters is where do you determine stormwater to be a thing that is a human interaction versus just it's water flowing off the hill.
Yeah. So well, getting the feeling in the room, I'm happy to move from the chair that we leave the report on the table. Do we have a seconder for that? Thank you, councillor Granny. All in favour? Anyone against? Well, it's carried. Right. Yeah, I think we might actually break for a cuppa now. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so that gives us a little bit more time. So yeah, we'll take a 20-minute break and we'll return at 10 to 12. Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to reconvene on item 7.6 on page 49 of our agenda, which is the draft significant forecasting assumptions for the 23-24 annual plan. And I've got Robin up to the table.
Good, thank you. I'm here to present the draft significant forecasting assumptions report for the 2023-2024 annual plan. So the report is to review and adopt the draft significant forecasting assumptions to be used for we adopted in June. We'll take the report as being read and we'll highlight the changes in the forecasting, the non-financial forecasting assumptions, and then hand over to Emma. Staff presented the draft financial assumptions paid to finance and insurance on September 28, 2022. And the non-financial assumptions on 15th of February 2023. These meeting committee endorsed the changes from the interest rates on borrowing, and we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. And the committee also endorsed moving the level of uncertainty on the climate change assumption. And also noted that the finance and insurance meeting on the 15th needing to change in date within their document, which we've done. So I'll take you over to paragraph 9 of the next page. Recommending and finance and insurance we have agreed to change the climate change assumption list as part of the current LPP 2021-21. The LiDAR flights would be undertaken within the first 12 months of the LTP, and as stands at the writing of this report, the flights were only 70% complete. The remainder of the region still be time when the data should be ready to be used by December 2023. So because of that lateness in the data, staff are recommending moving the level of uncertainty from moderate to high, and the risk if the assumption is incorrect from medium to high due to the age of the data being used to determine the risk currently, and the timeframes are included by us. If the significant assumptions are adopted by council as part of this report, they can still be amended and updated until the annual plan is adopted in June 2023. I'll hand over to Emma now. Talk about some of those interests changes.
So I'll just remind you that the interest rate on borrowing assumption was increased from 2 to 4.35%, and the price level changes, which is inflation assumption, was changed to non-commitment, including any allowance for the relevant market indices. In all other cases, the budget will be based on the appropriate estimate, which may include a relevant market indices or both of these assumptions have been included in the current budgets. So upon reviewing the cost estimates assumptions, staff felt there needed to be more clarification that the price level change in assumption is inflation, and the cost estimates assumption is how the inflation estimates and contract variations are applied to budgets. So it's the same assumption we've just split into two. We're just asking council to clarify that the price level changes assumption is inflation is only included where appropriate using either relevant market indices or projections prepared by the Business and Economic Research Limited, which is BURL, which are based on the October 2022 published values as summarised in Appendix B. And cost estimates, where a commitment is known, the budget will be based on that commitment, including any allowance for the relevant market indices. In all other cases, the budget will be based on an appropriate estimate, also including an allowance for the inflation based on BURL or market indices. And I'd just like to ask that there's a correction to Resolution D. At the moment, it's based on October 2020, and as discussed, that the moment will be at 2020. Any questions?
I'm pleased you raised that, Bill, because yeah, that was a note from that finance and insurance. So will that be changed in the minutes as well for the actual, because the report's got 2020 repeated all through there. Just a question for Robin on the that paragraph 9. In relation to what we just heard before with the flights being done faster because the weather's better. Is there any way to apply pressure to get that LiDAR stuff done a lot quicker and because it seems to be holding up a lot of decision making going forwards, and it's been sitting at 80% for quite a while now, and it'd be good to sort of get to the end result a lot faster. I don't know if there's any ability to speed things up with it.
I can certainly talk with Marcus around that, but from what I understood that the flights, Marcus had talked about that at the finance and insurance meeting as well, that the flights are being done as you say, the weather is certainly a whole lot better and trying to get up there as often as possible. The next big part of that is digitising that information. So once the flights are done, then it's getting that information into a format that we can then use for modelling around the region as well. And that's a very big piece of work. So yeah, by December 2023, we certainly hope that that date is the date that we'll be able to get that or sooner.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Keast, Councillor Keast.
Thank you, Worship. I think we've been generous in saying that that's a really good piece of work, because most other provinces have already have LiDAR information out and ready to go. So I don't see why it is a massive piece of work in itself, but it seems to me like they're almost saying, oh, we've got to work out how to use it. Well, there's plenty of other people using it, so it shouldn't be that big a piece.
Councillor Menzies?
We were reading somewhere that it was going to take 6 months for the analysis to occur. So it's going to be ready by December 23. That would suggest the flights will be completed this month. So the detail would probably be around, and we get any information that would indicate that the analysis could occur more quickly, assuming that the flights will finish this month, if not already, given the good weather.
Thank you. Councillor Duffy?
Thank you. Just on that, I don't know whether I've got the right perception or not, but it seems to me that all of our statements around climate change are all linked to LiDAR. And I'm thinking that given what we know about climate change and what we've seen happen, that we should be broadening that quite a bit. There's a whole lot of stuff that we need to be thinking of in our assumptions now that we don't need LiDAR to tell us. And I think we need to just take a serious look at our vulnerabilities and our preparation. I know we've got a great setup with Emergency Management South, but Hawke's Bay probably did too, you know, sort of thing.
I think part of that is the things like the gravel build-up in the rivers, and we've been trying to get that global consent from ES, and there was an article in the paper the other day from Federated Farmers talking to this, but that's an ability for us to front foot when, and it is going to be when we get our next heavy rainfall event, if we can be ahead of the game with that. So I think, Marcus.
Sorry, the second part. Also under the tourism assumption on page 5 of that part of the report, it's talking about the increase in visitors to Stewart Island, Makiura, and the pressure on infrastructure and also the shortage of accommodation. I just want to point out the same issues apply in the Catlins, and I think that needs to be referred to.
It's really the forecasting assumptions that we're looking at here are the ones compared to the 2021-2031 LTP, and those assumptions are now being reviewed and will be repeated again for the next LTP, and all of that information will be updated within that, including data that's coming through from Great South and the metrics. Some of that's only just being made available now. When the second meeting we had yesterday, some more information coming through from Great South, and Great South is also part of that, the typing information as well. There's also the work happening regionally on climate change with all of the four authorities. And we have some climate change assumptions being prepared by our own staff now in relation to the carbon footprint also. So there's lots of things happening, and that will be more relevant and more discussed for as part of that.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just that climate change assumption moving from moderate to high, what is the practical implications of moving that level of uncertainty?
Through Your Worship, as I understand it, it's about the risk to council if we've got the assumption incorrect. It's identifying that there could be a risk if we've got that incorrect.
Okay, well, just to further to Councillor Duffy's point about managing infrastructure so that it's able to withstand some heavy showers of rain. It would be good to see some new thinking perhaps around when it comes time for the LTPs, around how we can make the infrastructure or build infrastructure so that people are more resilient at home. Perhaps the water tanks could be one example of that.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor O'Brien, sorry.
Probably just more of a generalisation. Thinking about the mapping and the LiDAR and the correlation between what everyone's talked about thus far, the relationship between where water starts, where it finishes, the risks associated in particular with our coastal areas and then inland areas, coastal issues with erosion, drought as an example. I'd really like to think that there would be a strong relationship between Regional Council, Environment, Southland Council, finding solutions to some of those issues, because historically, I don't think that has been the case. I think we've been relatively isolated from each other. And it's only because this pressure's coming on more so than ever that pressure's coming right on. Now we should probably really do something about it. And I'll give you an example. You know, a large catchment area of hill country property might ask the regional council to come and inspect the property and come up with some solutions. And that solution is put to the table. And whether or not that has carried through or not, the implications of basically doing nothing have meant that the district council have had to pick up the pieces. And I'd like some kind of assurance that we're going to be kind of working with them cohesively to find those. Do you know what I mean? I know. They call it working in silence.
Through your worship, it said the regional climate change working group is now running. There was their first governance meeting happened on the 24th of February, and Councillor Wilson attended that along with myself and the Deacon. And within that group, we're looking to be able to come up with strategies that go right across the whole of the Southland district. We're using similar language where appropriate. We're able to provide an assumption that works across the whole district as well, and working together to create some solutions. That was started by understanding in June 2022 with climate change. Certainly, there is some things happening in that space.
Yeah, I guess it's also quite timely too, based on some of the issues and challenges and pressures that forestry industry is also under. And that's a two-pronged approach, in my opinion, in terms of what I'm seeing in the hill country of Southland. We still have areas that are extensively affected and infested with wild and pine issues. But also, I guess there's the contemplating where as a council too, where our forestry assets are being planted. I know Stu gave us a report around that last year, but you know, the goalposts may have shifted again. And you know, once again, working with our landowners and our catchments right out to the coast in terms of things like appropriate plantings for the future. So it's going to be really exciting to hear how that all goes.
It's really worship. I think this 2024 LPP coming up and the 2027 LPP will certainly be some great conversations around climate.
Councillor Byers and then Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just on that, Councillor Bryan's point, working with ES, the Matara a few years ago was mapping the tops of the banks, and I understand that it's going to be difficult to make those any taller or higher. So it seems to me like there's it's important that we start developing or encouraging the wetlands further up the country. to act as sponges in times of rainfall events. And so that might be, because otherwise, you know, the community picks up the tab further downstream. So that might be something that we could engage with Environment Southland on. So I understand that they're not really, there's a feeling there that perhaps some areas that needs to happen, but that's not being pursued across.
I think there's a collaboration there with the Thriving Southland catchment groups, and you've got the reimagining Mataura happening through Ngāi Tahu, and linking all those together with our role as well, and what we can all do as a Southland collective to, like you say, not push the problem further downstream. So yeah, I think it's a wider issue.
It'd be good to actually start the list of what would be important for us to engage with environments out and over or on.
Yeah. And that can form part of those hui's that are happening at the moment with that Councillor Wilson's attending. So yeah, it's a good opportunity to share those in that as well.
Can I speak on that?
Yes.
So the first meeting was establishing terms of reference of how the working group, and it does appear to be more of a working group scenario versus a vote for both governance levels. So with staff and councillors from across those teams. But yeah, like Rob mentioned, the Reimagining Mataura project as another example of something that Linz and Fonterra and Runanga are working on together. Examples from that and other examples from around the region, hoping that coming into that work group, some of those examples is what will be the information share. And I guess I'd personally seek help from council on how I can help communicate what's going on with those working groups, and just trying to keep the conversation two ways as well from the agencies working together. I've got a copy of the terms of reference of that working group here. So if I can digitise it somehow and send it to council.
Thank you. Councillor Menzies, sorry.
Your worship, Councillor Wilson, this comments probably cover some of what I'm about to say, because we've had the 3 opportunities to meet as councillors regionally, and from it has come this working group. And obviously our concerns have been highlighted by the recent events in the North Island, both in terms of emergency management response, but also overall in relation to the climate change that is occurring. And how might we as councillors get regular updates to be assured, I guess, that work's ongoing in a timely way, and also aware that a number of organisations are probably developing their own climate change policies and responses, which just identifies it's vital that we're working together. We have the iwi Ngāi Tahu strategy on climate change strategy, with the Department of Conservation have one as well. Are we all linking together and putting our resources together to get the most effect out of all the work that is going on? And if we could have a regular report back from that working group and here to see how we can support or Councillor Wilson and yourself on that group, and we know it's happening in a timely way.
I also feel that engaging the community boards in that process is going to be key, because a lot of between the silos of reducing emissions and the silo adapting to the changes that are coming, there's going to be lots of potential community-led solutions, particularly in that adaptation space. So engaging community boards and members of the community on what ideas have you got? How do we grow more food for communities and things like that? Will be important to have that level of communication.
Councillor Chamberlain.
I just a little bit concerned. I think the points have been raised by Don and Paul, and even Pam mentioned, with culverts stuff. A lot of the stuff that happened in Auckland was block culverts and just general maintenance. And my fear at the moment is a whole lot of talking going on, and not a lot of practical action. And cleaning up culverts and stuff like that can be done easily.
Yeah, totally agree. We need to be looking at what we can do right now to address that. And even to my point earlier about the gravel building up and those sorts of things,
I just don't want it to see it be a talk fest and climate change. It's actually want to see some action, I suppose. We're doing the basics that we can control.
Yeah, completely.
We have 500 mils of rainwater.
Yeah.
There's the call too that we need to have the complete data and get the LiDAR, but there's also a call that we can't sit around waiting for the data and we have to just get on with.
But there's stuff we could be doing today that help mitigate a little bit.
And I imagine, I don't know who can answer this, maybe Cameron, but through the through the roading alliances and those sorts of things, that the culverts being checked on and looked at as a high priority in relation to what's happened up north to mitigate some, or put the ambulance at the top of the cliff rather than at the bottom. Well, I imagine that's part of the weekly kind of checks that are done, but are we comfortable that enough of that work is being done checking those culverts and everything else? Sorry, quite an open-ended question.
I'd love to give you a real answer. I can't give you a specific answer. It's certainly when there's a bit of a warning that an event is coming, and sometimes with weather events, there is that opportunity. The team do go out to look at the critical areas or the known critical areas. I think that what's happened up in the north has overwhelmed any recognised system and called into question a whole lot of previous decisions where in effect developments happened in places that it probably shouldn't have. And those are probably the longer, harder issues for all councils, including regional councils, about not necessarily even adaptation, but actually that ability for humans to overlook a risk because it might not happen very often, and particularly when the pressure's on for a council to make decisions around development in areas that actually were marked on our district plan that weren't ideal. And I can remember the first council bus trip I went on. Unfortunately, I'm trying to identify the location of it, but I can remember the then chief executive pointing to a building and pointing out to the councillors on the bus that was in a floodplain, but building had been allowed there, and it was, it was sort of identifying it as an example of actually while we don't know when the frequency, when it will happen, that's an area that's a risk. It's a risky development. It's been allowed to go ahead, but there could well be some consequences. Those are the bigger issues that I think are, for me, coming out of all of this stuff. But the maintenance schedule around culverts, sorry, it's too specific for me.
But I guess part of that could actually be using the RFS system if farmers and people are seeing that culverts are blocked, to actually report it so that we can do something about it. We've got quite a big roading network and we're probably not getting across it all the time. So if things are identified, then we can address them as well. Councillor Graney and then Councillor Menzies.
Through your worship, it isn't just the culverts, I think I can use an example in our area around management of the Upakarora and probably some of the other rivers that we've got as well, in that it seems to me that there needs to be there really needs to be consensus that climate change is an issue, and that these flooding type events or any other events actually are going to seriously negatively impact. We talked about the clearance of gravel earlier. Now, I know particularly with the Upak River, there has not been consensus around how much gravel should be moved. There was agreement to take gravel from above the river, but not below the river. But above the bridge, but not below the bridge, and yet that road is, it's the only lifeline into North and South. And to Cameron's point, assessing it just before is probably not ideal, and certainly the people standing on some of these bridges that we've got, feeling them rumbling, because we've not been proactively managing the river. So I think my point being that, you know, the docks, the fishing games, everybody needs to actually get on the same page, and how we can enable that to happen would be, in my mind, something that we could do to be proactive rather than reactive. And I think it needs to come from a more central space, from an SDC space, as opposed to perhaps a localised space in this particular instance, so that we're addressing it around the district.
Yeah, one of the pieces of advice that came out from the Rural and Provincial Conference in Wellington last week from some of the mayors that have been affected was basically pick your worst case scenario and plan for that. Don't plan for the simple stuff. Actually look at what's the worst thing that's going to happen, and then have a look and see how ready you are for it, because they certainly experienced that up there. Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Bishop. Councillor Brainey's just covered my exact point. We've been talking around this table, I guess, the concerns around gravel build-up since I've been on council, and there was discussion about Environment Southland seeking a global consent as a way of addressing that. So as an action, I don't know that needs a resolution. Could we invite Environment Southland representative to attend their the next possible opportunity, a meeting to update us on where that is at, because I think that's just one action that we can identify right here and now from the concerns that have been expressed.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic idea, and we can get them along to our next meeting. And
I think that public, our ratepayers may well take the opportunity to watch in and be part of that, not part of the discussion, but watch the discussion and see that there is some action occurring.
Councillor Chamberlain.
I totally agree with what Christine's saying, but I just wonder whether it shouldn't be more of a letter to them sort of ASAP, so when they do come, not explaining ourselves again, that we actually come with some answers or some solutions.
Yeah.
Because then we're another month or 2 months down the track before we even get to.
Yeah. No, that's very valid. So they're actually coming with answers rather than coming just to hear the questions. Yeah, very valid. Well, any further? Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Byers.
Question. And I think it's important that we acknowledge some of the older members of our community who were in the former land care organisations. And now I think that the catchment groups through Thriving Southland. It's very easy for us to say, well, let's take new information and LiDAR information and with that new technology, but I think it's important to acknowledge some of the older members of our community who have historical knowledge and expertise, which needs to be addressed, and based on the numbers of people who are affected, which is everyone, that level of community engagement needs to be acknowledged as well. Because there are actually some real practical solutions that come from some fairly simple things, and something that I noted relatively recently, stemming from some of the issues around rivers in North Island, where that maybe it's not appropriate to do this anymore in this particular area. Maybe we can't build infrastructure here anymore. But talking about the gravel side of things, it's like, well, we know that we're having to constantly take liquid out of rivers, but we also know why. But are we able to actually put the measures in place to mitigate and prevent those things from happening in the future? And that's where that level of disconnect that I was talking to you about before between the regional council and the district council had been realised. So we can, there's a certain level of natural erosion which will take place, but we still can actually make provisions to actually mitigate and prevent those things. So yeah, I just think remember the older members of the community in these rural areas who have a good amount of knowledge. Yeah, and I've got and that's through those categories.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Page 53 and 29 through 34. interest rate and investments and reserves. I'm wondering if we could just make this a wee bit clearer for everyone and have the numbers that we're talking about, $40 million. Borrowing externally, and then these numbers get a bit confused because we've got based on a 5-year term, something like 3-4% capital return after the fees. And somewhere else in that document, we've got a new rate for the borrowing rate having gone up to something like 4% or whatever it is. But we've got $750,000 here, but I don't think that that's particularly accurate given the new interest rates, borrowing rates. I'm wondering if that can get updated before there's any decision around that.
Through you this year, we decided not to change the assumption because staff are going to present an investment paper to council, which will include a further review of the interest rate on borrowing assumptions and return on investment assumption. They're all connected to that investment decision. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is why we made a decision not to change it until the papers come to you.
Okay, so it's this number here is not particularly accurate. Then I'm wondering if, and the next, when you present that paper, you could just bring out that number, the borrowing that we're talking about, this additional external borrowing, bring that number into the paper, $40 million. I think it needs to be a bit clearer.
I think that will follow the natural progression for that next piece of work that comes through. So that will flow from there.
I'm just saying to make that decision, it needs to be clearer. It's not particularly clear here, I don't think.
Any further questions, Councillor Duffy?
Just getting back to the rivers. Councillor Keith might remember better than myself. We were at a hui at the Hokanui Marae to do with the Matara River back towards December. And there was a Frenchman there who had considerable knowledge on river management. And I believe it was an approach that's well worth looking at closer. And it's basically getting the river to fix itself in a way. And the McGregor Concrete Company are sort of following those practices over at Rosebush now. And I mean, he basically, the bits I remember, like he sort of said, you can send a digger in and dig a hole, but then that hole becomes a problem in itself and leads to other problems. Whereas this more holistic approach is a better long-term decision, long-term action.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to make sure that we're, as Councillor O'Brien suggested, looking at all possibilities, not just what we used to do in the 60s.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, if you look at aerial imagery compared to what was classed as rivers, compared to what a plain photo will show you now, what the river's doing, it's a very different scope and essentially that gravel scraping concept that McGregor's been doing is a restoration and wetlands project, like Tom was mentioning. It's bringing some level of restoration to rivers to do the natural flood prevention or flood management that they're naturally intended to do. And if we look at actually what rivers have been formed into, that's going to be adding to the why we need to now suck gravel out of it, because it's all being channeled into one mono braid, and braided rivers aren't intended to do that. So I think that it was a really eye-opening hui, and good to see some cool examples being tested. The Upper Rima River's got a really good test case on it with some good results, and it's definitely worth looking at.
I think the key word from all of this is that collaboration between the landowners, the historic use, the people that know the lay of the land, and then all the different stakeholders, councils, everyone needs to actually work together on this, because the Matara River doesn't decide that it's suddenly in Southland District's boundary or in Gore District's boundary. It's the same river from start to finish. So it's it's how we manage those collaboratively with all the stakeholders for and not letting any unnecessary barriers get in the way of progressing to where it needs to go. Councillor Keast.
Yes, thank you, Rita. That would be my question, is how do we actually get action on this? Because there's some really good examples of stuff that is proven and supportive of the ecological sides of managing rivers so that they are doing all of their natural state and therefore improving the integrity of their banks and their the sediment, etc. But it seems to me that we can talk about it as a report piece. We talk about it, we know about it, but how we actually get it into the contractors' mode of operandi, that's the way it's worked. So it's really key that this that the direction setting that we're coming up to go in is actually embraces all that and you get that loud and clear, but can't be business as usual.
And we actually drive the work. I mean, the easiest way to get something done is a committee of one. And the more people you put in the room, the less likely you actually get that tangible work out of it. So yeah, it's a very valid point. Councillor Wilson.
Just to follow up on that. So in Lumsden, there's one of these gravel extracted ponds, which I believe is from that gravel's going towards SDC roading. So that would be SDC to say, well, that's not, we don't want that practice. But that's obviously going to add costs to roading. So there's a balance of figuring out. So ES are going to be giving the resource consent for that extraction, but we're essentially the consumer of gravel. So at what point does the practice kind of get enforced a change? Is it at the resource consent, or as the consumers and people using that gravel saying, well, no, we want, I guess you could call it sustainable gravel extraction for our district, for our use, would be a pragmatic way to make a change happen.
Oh, so we've got the recommendations on page 51, A3 to D, noting the change to October 2022 for the bill figures. And I don't think there are any other changes in there. Is there someone willing to move those recommendations? Councillor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Cleese. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Carried. Thank you. Good discussion. All right, we'll move on to 7.7, which is progress report on the annual plan, which is page 85 of your agenda. And I think we've got the same people at the table.
Purpose of this report, because I'm here to do the progress of the annual plan along with that. There's two things which we come to this report. One being the council resolved to proceed with the annual plan without undertaking any consultation based on information provided in this report. And the second purpose of this report is to provide council with an update on the progress of the annual plan, including a draft of financial statement and associated rate changes. So I'll take the report as read and we'll talk to the non-consultation parts of this report, handing over to Emma to update on the financial statement. So on the 15th of February 2023, Finance and Insurance Committee endorsed the project plan for the annual plan 2023-2024. The committee resolved to recommend to council that the formal consultation on the annual plan would not be undertaken due to no significant or material differences from year 3 of the current LTP. And instead, council undertake a communication information approach, and the committee also endorsed not return to a surplus until year 4 of the LTP due to customer appreciation funding remaining financially prudent and as discussed, the committee meeting staff will continue to work on the communication information approach, and the annual plan information document will be produced and an update on the public. So an update the public on the proposed direction and proposed rate increases will be available on the website in June. The staff are also expected to communicate via first edition, newsletters, social media, providing opportunities for feedback through council's Make It Stick platform. And ratepayers will also be able to look up their own address on the new SDC website, which goes live in March, which it is March, but it's later in March, and be able to see their individual rates, what that is. Take you over to paragraph 12, which is the page. Staff have assessed the annual plan 2023-24 against the significant spend engagement policy in year 3 of the current LTP. To see if there were any significant variations. While the total rate increase changed above what was projected in the LTP, and Emma will talk us a little bit more through that, it's given that due to the increase of inflationary costs as well as the planned level in reserves. Staff do not consider the variations to be significant in requiring any consultation. As such, staff are recommending no formal consultation be undertaken regarding the communication information approach. And staff are recommending that council accepts this project and provides further information. I'll hand over to Emma to talk about financial.
Good morning again. This report includes the draft annual plan 23-24 financial statement. The key financial information section, which starts in paragraph 22, staff have analysed the financial results in two different ways. The first section compares the annual plan with the FY23 and explains what is driving those changes. And the second section compares the annual plan with a 5 years annual plan and explains the main drivers for the rate increase. So firstly, comparing to the LTP, revenue is up 6.1 million, and by other revenue of 3.3 million, which is mainly the increase in forestry income and environmental service fee. Waka Kotahi 1.3 million and rates 1.7 million, which is mainly the STC portion of roading and the increase in waste services costs and grants of 675,000. Operating expenditure is up 5.8 million, driven by other expenditure 2.7 million, mainly forestry harvesting costs, waste disposal costs and fuel costs. Employee expenses of 1.8 million and finance costs of 1.3 million, which is mainly the interest rate rise. The revenue has increased more than operating expenditure, which is a good thing, and therefore the operating deficit has reduced by 300,000. Equity has increased 356,000, mainly an increase in the value of our assets, and council expects to draw down a further 21 million debt. So one of the ways council views financial prudence is through the 6 benchmarks found in the table in paragraph 36. There's been no change to the year 3 of the LTP, and council is still meeting 5 of the 6 benchmarks. The one benchmark council continues to not meet is the balanced budget benchmark. Under section 100 of the Local Government Act 2002, councils are required to meet this benchmark by ensuring that projected operating revenues exceed the projected. In the first 3 years of the LPP, council predicted an operating deficit, mainly due to the phasing in of fully funding depreciation on key district assets. Council expects to meet this benchmark from 24-25 onwards. So staff are asking in resolution F, we're asking council to consider whether it's financially prudent to not meet the balanced budget benchmark due to our previous policy decisions around the funding of depreciation. I'd also like to bring the council's attention to some other key financial points staff have identified. The draft financial statements indicate a planned capital works program of 43 million. However, staff are currently doing a review of the 2023 program as a result of conflict of resourcing, timeline delays and cost increases. So you've actually got a workshop on that today. And staff have been, so there might be some changes to the final annual plan. You've had that workshop and you've given staff a program. As mentioned in the significant forecasting assumptions report, it's expected that council will make a formal decision on the investment borrowing approach in the coming months. And depending on that decision, changes might be made to the annual plan. I'd also like to point out maybe a need for the accounting rules for the transfer of through water assets for the new entities being formed, and this is meant to be completed as part of the final annual plan. And finally, as part of the development of the annual plan, staff have also been discussing extensions and changes to several local rating boundaries, which will result in some changes to the property paying certain full and full rates. And each of the community boards are planning to undertake separate consultation on these changes before making a final recommendation for inclusion. So that's the first part. As I mentioned earlier, staff have also analysed the financial results comparing the annual plan to the previous year. Overall rates have increased by 4.6 million, and the key drivers for this are 1.2 million of loan costs, mainly due to the interest rate rising from 3 to 4.35%. 960,000 of wastewater rate. It's because we're no longer using the strategic asset reserve to fund wastewater. 740 waste costs, that's mainly rubbish and recycling, and 558 of roading, which was the planned increase in the road implementation progress. So the proposed rate change for individual properties will vary throughout the district, depending on the type of property, its location, and the service it pays for, as well as its capital value. The increase in interest rate of 4.25% has significantly impacted the rate set on a fixed rates basis, such as sewerage, wastewater, and the fixed portion of the UHSC. As you'll know, this has affected residential households and townships more as they pay these service rates. Residential households have also been affected by the fixed wastewater rate no longer having $1 million strategic asset reserve funding. So you'll see this reflected in Appendix B, that the residential properties are going up by more. Okay, so table 1 shows by township the proposed average rate increase varies from 110 or 6% in Oropoka to $337 or 30% in Riversdale. Overall residential has increased by an average of 9.48. Table 2 shows by land use sector the proposed average rate increase varies from $76 or 1.83% for forestry to $886 or 10.63 for commercial properties. And table 3 shows all of the rate types. The average rate increase across the district is 7.84% compared to 5.75 in year 3 of the long-term plan. Does anybody have any questions or discussions?
I guess it's just an observation of kind of where we are in the scheme of local government, and we've got the long-term plan discussion sort of starting in a couple of weeks, and we've already sort of had discussions today around how we're doing those levels of service and addressing those sorts of issues. And it's, I guess, acknowledging the fact that our ratepayers are struggling to keep up with the demands that we're putting on them, but we're also struggling to match the need, and that's part of the whole long-term plan process, is to look at these numbers and get to a level that's going to be achievable. I did write something down, but I've totally forgotten about it, so I'll come back to that when I was. But are there any other questions from anyone? Councillor Bynes?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Emma. I think it's just a comment, but it might be a question at the end. The potential investment borrowing strategy, the borrowing of additional $40 million externally isn't reflected in here. So you talked about potential changes to the annual plans. So if that strategy goes through, there will be $40 million of extra external borrowing in this annual plan.
Really, Mr. Chair, as we've discussed at the Finance and Insurance meeting, what will show in the balance sheet will be the extra $40 million of external borrowings plus $40 million of investments.
And the timing of that as well, it might not be in this annual plan, because part of that decision will be when any of that investment happens as well. Am I correct? That's for the timing. So it may or may not have an impact on this annual plan.
Mr. Chair, that's one of the things that we will need to really look at. In June, we'll potentially be making some changes for whatever council makes its decision on the investment of the approach that will be coming to the next meeting.
Okay, so thank you. So at the moment, we've got $1.2 million of extra costs for our ratepayers because the interest rates on the external loans we've already got have gone up. So that's an additional 1.2 million. I think that's on 16 million. So if we go to the market and borrow an extra 40 million, then of course we're exposing the ratepayers to significantly more risk around the interest rate because it's external. We're not borrowing from ourselves.
I'll just interrupt this. I'll get what you're saying, and this part of the discussion is probably best had at the next part when we actually are discussing that part. It's for the purposes of this annual plan, where we're not addressing that part of it. That's going to come through as a separate report in a future meeting. So I think if we can discuss that part,
they're likely to be changing this annual plan. I think that's the point that I want to get across.
Through you, Chair, in our all our loans internally, and it doesn't matter whether they're loaned externally or internally, we track the loans, and I've increased the interest rate to 4.35%. So that is already included in the budget.
So that was from 2% in the past. Yeah.
So
the internal loan's been increased from 2 to 4.
Well, our loans, whether they're loaned externally or internally, I've increased them to 4.35%, like all our transfer and interest payments have already got that. But and that's what's driven that one. That's already included.
I just remembered what I'd written down while I read it. You mentioned about the communication side of it, and you mentioned the word feedback coming through, make it stick. I think we need to be very careful that because we aren't actually consulting, that we don't sort of inherently consult through that, because we're communicating what we're doing, but we're not actually. I don't want to sort of give the ratepayers a false perception that they can feed back into this as if it was a consultative process, if that makes sense. Councillor Chamberlain?
Yeah, I just have trouble in my head, and I don't quite probably understand how the whole system works, but given that our ratepayers are under financial pressure, you know, their interest rates cost and cost of living, blah, blah, blah. And us as the council are imposing a 7.8% increase in rates. It doesn't seem like that we are, perhaps, you know, what everybody else is going to, we're not sort of cutting back, or, you know, so I would, and not having input into the council expenditure, I won't be advocating for a rate increase. I will vote against it because I haven't had the input into those decisions.
That's true. I think just a comment on that though, part of it, I mean, the council's also exposed to the same pressures that everyone else is. We're still trying to, the cost of the roading, for example, the cost of all those materials are going up as they are for everyone else. So we're exposed to the same market as everyone. So inflation, we're not inflation proof. So yeah, that is part of what it was. But it's, when I say part of the local government process where you're at, it is hard for a new council to come in and you're looking at something that's been adopted by a previous council and working through. So that's part of the challenge of the space that we're in as well. So yeah, no, I accept what you're saying. Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, just you say we're exposed to the market like everyone else, but with this borrowing policy, we're exposing our ratepayers to an additional $40 million of external debt. And at the same time, we're exposing them to $40 million.
Can I just go back to my earlier point? And we'll talk about that when we're talking about that, which isn't, I know it's sort of part of this, but we are going to be having that discussion independent of this process. So we'll address that in
today's meeting.
No. So, any further questions, Councillor Duffy?
No, just a question on the government levy on waste for landfills. So, does that levy apply to green waste?
I don't know personally. Looking around the room.
But I suspect that here the green waste may go to landfill because we don't have a compost.
We do have.
That's what I'm sort of wondering, because now, I mean, for quite a few years we were told that we weren't allowed green waste in the red bins, but now we are allowed to. And I know that the bin that goes away from home is probably always at least 2/3 full of green waste. So I'm imagining that the levy would apply to what goes in the bin.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, if we could separate that, that levy could be perhaps the volume of that. Right.
Which is a perfect thing to look at the long-term plan discussion as a way to change something and potentially get some savings. It's a really good example of something we could do. Councillor Greenie.
Through your worship. Yeah, I think it's a separate conversation. I think that whole waste management piece is a separate conversation, separate project, but it would be good to have that incorporated somewhere in the mix so that we don't actually lose sight of the need to start to look at that.
And I think given the fact that levy actually has another side to it where they actually hand out money for initiatives that are looking at reducing waste, and we can actually leverage both sides of that and potentially get savings and pay for those savings through new opportunities we identify. Councillor Menzies.
You've just
looked at that in there.
Yes, it's a possibility that we can access funding. You know, we need to think about how we're doing that, but perhaps we need that specific discussion around waste management again sooner rather than later. It may not be room on the agenda for some time, but if we can get it as soon as possible, that would be useful.
Councillor Sprague.
Yeah, I just fully endorse that comment because I actually discussed with Karen coming out up here today that the Stewart Island Board is going to request a review of the waste management system on the island. And I think it's important that it does go district-wide.
Yeah.
And through
there's certainly a need for it.
Yeah, through your worship, it's also under discussion in Tiana again. Bins in Tiana.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to form a very big part of our discussions coming up very soon. So, right, we've got what do we? A through to J in the recommendations. So I'm actually going to go through these individually just to if they're important. So A to C, we already know about. D, we're agreeing to the updated annual plan 23-24 project plan. E, we're receiving the draft 23-24 annual plan financial statements and associated rate change analysis by township and land use sector. F, so this is noting that we are not doing a balanced budget, so we're agreeing to that and for the reasons that were indicated around depreciation. G, acknowledging that changes to the financial and rate information may occur before the final annual plan is reviewed by the committee in June. H, agrees to no formal consultation on the annual plan be undertaken due to no significant or material difference from year 3 of the 21-31 long-term plan. I, agrees to undertake a communication information approach when communicating with the community about the 23-24 annual plan. And J, supports community boards to undertake separate consultation on the proposed rating boundary extensions to Aparima Hall, Nightcaps Hall, Mosburn Hall, Northern Pool, Tutarau Hall, Edendale, Wyndham Hall, and Mokareta Redden Hall, as indicated in the attachments C, D, E, F, G, H, and I. That was a mouthful. Is there someone in the position to move those recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Keast, all in favour? Anyone against? Thanks, Councillor. Do you want that recorded?
Your worship, can I just make an additional comment just on I, and that would be to equip our community boards with being able to communicate to the individual communities. When that communication strategy is developed, so that they actually have the wherewithal to have those discussions.
Yeah, do we want to amend that motion or are you happy just with that?
I'm happy for it to stand as it is, but it's noted.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question for clarification? In paragraph 12, where it talks about not considering the variations to be significant to require formal consultation, what is that threshold of significance to reach formal consultation?
I guess a short answer is a deviation from what was actually agreed on in the long-term plan. So look, the inflationary component that's come through the interest rates isn't, we haven't done a step change in what we had planned to do to what we're actually doing. So it's not a big change in the delivery. It's just a change in the circumstances around how we're delivering it.
So a change in level of service would hit that threshold.
Potentially, yeah. So anyone want to, any staff want to add to my explanation? Was it sound enough? Cool. So it's been moved and seconded. All in favour? We had one against, and I'll declare that motion carried. And thank you for that discussion again, everyone. That's great. Thank you to the staff. Yay. How far away from lunchtime? Move into public excluded. Yeah. Right, we just got the public excluded item on the agenda next. So would someone like to move that we go into public excluded? Thank you, Councillor Graney. Seconder, Councillor Spragan. All in favour? That's carried. And then we may actually, do we through that in June?
But we've already through the public to go through them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I haven't actually seen the times. We have got that. 10 to 1, shall we stop for lunch now? Yeah, we'll have a break for lunch now. Thank you.
Sorry.